Hi, I'm James King. This is the presentation I did for the Institute of Business Analysts professional day in Melbourne, where 270 business analysts were spending the day learning about new techniques, new approaches, and this talk in particular, the value of a BA in different types of projects. I began by introducing myself, which I won't do here. We had quite an interactive session, which again, we won't have here. This is just a video summary of what I presented. It may be quite dry, but some people asked if I could present it again or if they could get some information on it. So that's the purpose of this video. My original plan was to start with the provocative question. What's the value of a BA in an agile project? Do we even need a BA in an agile project? But given there were 270 business analysts in front of me, I chickened out. I thought a better start would be to say BAs are really valuable. Then I talked about BAs in different contexts, in an agile initiative, a user-centered design project, data science projects, and what I call politically driven projects. I didn't mean Machiavelli projects killing people. I meant projects designed to achieve a political agenda or a change management that impacted different types of stakeholder groups within an organization. So that's the gist of the talk. Different contexts, what happens to the BA, how do they get an opportunity there, and how do they continue to add value? But to start with, I thought I'd ask a generic question. Do we ever need a BA? Many of the projects I've done in my life have involved analysis, but we haven't always had a BA. Last century, I didn't even know there was a BA when I was doing BA type of work. Based on that, what I see people not doing in agile projects is starting with what's needed on the project. Rather than saying this is a BA, they write requirements documents, how do I do it here? We take an approach like a BA would typically do, saying what's needed here, what could help, and if the BA can help here, what does that look like? That allows us to do a job description more around what value do I add on a project, rather than saying I do job 1, 2, 3, 4, hopefully you can use them. We start, as a BA should, with what's needed here, who's getting some value, what can the BA provide, and what difference does it make? A lot of the talks at the professional day were about Agile and the impact on the BA, or Agile and where the BA fits in. In fact, I think one of the reasons I was invited to do the keynote is that I was one of the authors of the Agile extension to the Babok version 2. That's what we're up to at the moment, looking at how business analysis operates in an agile context. So I started by mentioning that I'd been to an international conference where BAs were there talking about the value of BAs in agile, but even at an international level, people seemed quite confused. But why are people confused? I think it's because they don't do a gap analysis. This is my theory. They turn up and they wonder what a BA does, but they haven't really worked out what is this project trying to achieve. We may be doing agile, but what does that mean here? So they ask, where does agile say we need a BA? And it doesn't. How do we do the same work we used to do? Well, we don't, because the work we do changes on different projects. How do I choose between proper analysis and the speed needed in agile? Well, agile doesn't mean you have to panic, and proper analysis doesn't mean you take forever. So the questions we should be asking come back to, what are we trying to achieve? How do we get there? If we ask what we're trying to achieve, then hopefully agile helps us get there, and hopefully a BA helps us get there. But next we hit a bit of a misunderstanding about what agile is. Some people think it means no documenting and no apologies, and that's great. In those projects you don't need a BA. You just need a lot of luck and to get out of there before you deliver. But if we actually understand what agile is, then we understand that agile approaches require analysis. They may or may not need a BA, but there's analysis involved in producing something new. There's analysis involved in understanding customers. So if we start with this basic assumption, then we can say, is an agile context different? If so, how is it different? And how is the analysis done in this context? Well, how is analysis different in an agile context? I guess we have to compare it to something. So a lot of the talks during the day compare agile to a traditional IT project using waterfall type techniques. Looking at the difference here for many of the BAs, we have interaction is different because it's not interact with stakeholders at the beginning, then hand over to team. it's interact continuously through the entire project. So the analysis involves ongoing, continuous interaction, which therefore needs someone to facilitate that interaction. This is the first area I think business analysis might be different. The second is that the learning technique is not so much the engineering technique of analysing everything up front, referring to standards and then building according to design. It's more aligned to the scientific method, where learning comes from experiments, and therefore there's a lot of importance placed on interpreting the feedback, building feedback into the process of designing and in the process of building and the process of talking to stakeholders. We need to be analysing feedback rather than getting it right before we start. Aligned with this, continuous analysis and continuous discovery mean things aren't quite linear. So we need to manage the evolution of knowledge. We need to understand when something we thought was true is no longer relevant. We need to understand when something unexpected turns out to be important. And we need to understand that we're building on our existing knowledge. We're not starting afresh every sprint like someone with amnesia. The final thing I think is a bit more subtle. I missed this myself for a long time. Quite often agile projects shift away from the idea of a project with a deadline to a product management approach, where we need not so much to win by delivering something on time at the end of the project, but we're interacting with the customer and the product to build something that evolves over time. So the analysis has to look at how is the product changing, not so much how are we just delivering something in this project. So if analysis is happening, who's doing it? Well, in many teams there's a product owner. The product owner to me is a decision-making role, not a subject matter expert and not an analyst. That's not to say they can't do those things, but for me the role is about making a decision. People making decisions often do their own analysis, and often a product owner is doing that. The team are also doing analysis. A BA can be a member of that team. If there's no BA there, developers, testers, whoever's in the team can be doing the analysis. And with the wisdom of the crowd and continuous interaction, I actually think things have shifted, so the stakeholders are participating more in the analysis. They're not handing over information to be analysed by a team, they're analysing the information with the team. So if the product owner, the team and the stakeholders are all doing analysis, I see a role for somebody who can facilitate or be a force multiplier to make people more effective in their analysis. Rather than replacing them doing the analysis, we leverage their talent and we give them different approaches and we work with them to more effectively analyse. So analysis is happening in our Agile project, and it can be happening pretty effectively. But are there any gaps that a BA can fill besides just facilitating people collaborating? Well, yes, I think there are. The first one is that knowledge management in Agile projects is often superior to other projects in that everybody knows what's going on. A shared understanding helps people solve the problems better, but often that knowledge is tacit. The knowledge needed by the team is there, but if the team have to hand that knowledge over, refer back to it later, there can be a role for somebody to capture what is valuable, not all the noise, not all the decisions, but to sort through and say what explicit knowledge do we want to capture outside our brains that we can hand to others or refer back to later. Not so much on the way into the team for analysing information, but once we've produced something, what do we leave behind? The second gap that's often there is unfortunate. It's that Agile teams are often IT teams, so they often focus on code development, not the business process or the business rules. That's nothing to do with the Agile context, that's to do with the bias of the people involved. But often it means there's a gap when nobody's really understanding the change to the business rules and the back-end processes. They understand the value to the customer of what they're building. And they're building front-end systems and back-end systems, but there's room for somebody to actually go and do the hard yards to work out the rest of this. The next one is a quite obvious one, I guess. If you have a team of 5, 10, 12 people, you want to analyse things, you want to talk to your stakeholders, but you don't want to be like a 5-year-old playing soccer where the entire team goes to every meeting and meets with every stakeholder. Instead, you can send out a single BA as an anthropologist or diplomat. They can go out, find information, bring it back to then consume and analyse it with the team. It's not writing requirements documents. It's not waterfall. It's gathering information efficiently with one person, sometimes needed, sometimes two, sometimes the entire team. Finally, and probably most importantly, a lot of people mistake discussion for analysis. We talked about something so we understand it is the assumption. But actually talking about something and understanding it are two different things. So the real role for a business analyst in an agile project could be to help fill the gap where discussion and agreement are based on analysis and understanding, not just discussion and agreement. So that's how I think a BA can fit into an agile team. What does that mean for the BA? So if you're a BA and you want to be very successful in agile projects and make heaps of money and have a fun life, what can you do? Well, the most obvious thing is become a product owner. You get to make the decisions and you get to do the analysis and you get to do a similar-ish role to the old days. Some BAs were already making decisions on behalf of the business, but now we've made it official. That's one area you can go into. Another option though is to stay as a BA but facilitate learning rather than handing knowledge over. That means you're still doing the BA role, but you have to change your approach so that you're facilitating the process of people learning things rather than capturing and documenting and handing over information. Similar to that, you can become a combined tester BA. Some testing is automated now, some BAs don't like testing, but actually I'm going to claim testing is a source of knowledge on agile projects, and in both the scientific method and in agile, testing is a source of requirements and testing is a source of knowledge. So I suspect many BAs are going to be doing a lot of testing in agile. The next option I mistakenly called librarian, which people didn't find very sexy, but to become the knowledge manager for future people to refer back to. Not so much the person capturing requirements, but the person capturing the knowledge to leave behind. I see this as an emerging gap in many organisations. We can't document everything, but we can't document nothing. But also people mistake a document for knowledge. There's a profession, I think, available for actually building organisational knowledge and capability. Very similar to that is the traditional role of analysing processes and business rules still exists. It still can't be done all up front, and it can't be done over a period of 10 years. It has to be done continuously, but nonetheless, it's still the same job. And finally, many BAs have a roaming detective or diplomat who goes out and investigates things and comes back. I think this role is slowly changing, which I might refer to later, to become more of a community facilitator, facilitating different stakeholders getting their input, as well as going out. It's not so much just gathering information, it's helping people manage the process of communicating and collaborating and helping people manage the process of analysing the information they get to truly get the benefit of the wisdom of the crowd, not just involving the team of 7 or 8 people building something, but involving the stakeholders so they can truly contribute to the process of understanding and the process of analysing and supporting informed decisions. So there you have it. That's what to do if you're in an agile setting. But what happens if it's not agile? Well, the next cool thing that's happening is design thinking. Here there's a bit of a challenge though. I think some people think design thinking is grabbing crayons and doing a traditional project, but it's not. Design thinking for me is about solving wicked problems. A wicked problem is not a hard problem, it's a problem that can't be solved through good analysis. We interact with the problem instead of analysing it up front. So if we're not analysing the problem up front, do we even need a BA? Well, again, the question's not where does design thinking say we need a BA, it's what is design thinking, what analysis is needed, and how can a BA potentially help? So here's where there's some confusion. For me, design thinking is a predictable pattern where we start with empathy and understanding the customer's context, and then we go through creating new ideas, building prototypes and testing them and then refining. But there are a lot of people who've said a lot more about it than me, including sculpting statues, setting high expectations and getting out of the building. But design thinking still is a structured process for understanding customer needs and understanding the context in which they apply. So whatever we say it is, there has to be some analysis involved. Like Agile, design thinking is misunderstood, and some people try to do it in a very linear way, starting with some customer design, then getting some requirements, maybe doing a prototype and building from the prototype. In fact, the process is different. The assumption of design thinking is our gut instincts might be wrong. we'll make many wrong assumptions and have many bad ideas, and that if we sit down and try to analyze these ourselves, we won't understand the potential value. What we've got to do is get out there and interact with the world, putting our assumptions out there and exposing our bad ideas for them to be destroyed and for them to hopefully evolve, so that some ideas evolve and then we know we're on target through evidence and we start stabilizing and building an awesome product. But along the way, we've brought a lot of bad elements of products. So how is this different? Many projects have built bad products. Well, the difference, I think, is that when we talk Agile and IT, we often talk analysis as in breaking something down. We define what we want to understand, we define the scope, and then we understand the components. Once we understand the components and their relationships, we understand the whole system. For me, that's where a lot of BA work has been in the past. But in design thinking, it's not so much analysis of something by breaking it down, it's discovery of new things. Adding something new to our understanding of the world changes what we previously believed. In Australia, where I live, we have black swans, and they're quite famous because they upset Europeans when they arrived. Everybody knew that all swans were white. Nobody believed in pink, purple, blue, or black swans until they arrived in Australia and they saw something that looked like a swan and it was black. Either that meant there was a new bird species that looked like a swan, or it meant that swans could be black. Either way, it changed their understanding of the world. So the approach here is we define the discrepancy between our previous understanding, all swans are white, and what seems to be happening. There's a black bird that looks like a swan. We then state our old assumptions. That thing must be a new type of bird because it's not a swan. We look at alternative reasons and we say, well, maybe there are two types of birds, swans and something else, that are very similar. Maybe one evolved from the other. Maybe swans can be black. When we look at alternative reasons for the discrepancy, we have to validate the possible alternatives. And then when we come to a discovery, be it a theory or a definitely we're very confident theory, we incorporate that into our understanding, destroying some of our previous assumptions. To do discovery, though, we can't be right to begin with and then add to it. We have to go and experiment, add to our knowledge and learn. So this is what the design thinking process is. Of course, we analyze our new information, but actually what we're doing is discovering new information, not breaking down what we already knew. So if we're discovering new information and we're breaking it down and we're changing our old assumptions, there is analysis happening, but it's not necessarily a BA working between a business person handing them an observation and a developer building something. In fact, I claim dreamers are doing some analysis. They go through ideation and creativity and they come up with many, many bad ideas, frustrating the entire team. But hopefully along the way they stumble on a new idea we may not have thought of. That does involve analysis for good dreamers. Some just blurt stuff out, but actually the ideas have to be assessed. User experience people obviously do a lot of user-centered design. What they're doing is research and experimentation rather than subject matter experts being in interviews to capture requirements. What that means, though, is we don't build designs from requirements, we actually gather requirements from designs. So that flips things around. Designing something to learn from is different to learning and then designing. This is one of the key differences, but it still involves analysis. Again, the team are observing the world. Again, the team are testing and maturing the solution, be they developers, bricklayers, sculptors, it doesn't matter. And of course, the team can include a BA. The question is not, must the team include a BA? It's, would it add extra value having a BA in the team? If not a BA, who else is analysing the information we're being exposed to? So design thinking is pretty cool. But again, there can be some gaps. The biggest risk, I think, is falling in love with our ideas. I've worked with people quite often when they talk about Steve Jobs was amazing, therefore whatever idea I've had must be amazing. And if people think it's stupid, that means I'm ahead of my time, let's spend money. Well, actually history is full of people who did that, but most of them didn't end up famous like Steve Jobs. So falling in love with our ideas means we get into a lot of trouble. Not falling in love with our ideas means we have to rapidly experiment and not lock in plans, which is a very complex, difficult process which needs to be facilitated. I believe a BA can help with that. Also, building features is not experimenting. The design process creates variants and it creates rework. Prototypes are not the first cut of a system which we then build on top of. Prototypes are systems we're going to throw away. That creates valuable learning, but a BA can help bring structure to the process so we know when to build a new feature because we're building it, and when to build a prototype or experiment to learn from, and how to minimize the necessary expense and rework that's inherent in that process. The next gap, I think, is the focus on the customer, which is the real strength of design thinking. I've heard people say that we shouldn't use the term user because it's a negative term and we should talk about stakeholders. I actually think the customer or the user are unique among the stakeholders in that we design something for them to use. So I like the term user, but a focus on one thing means a focus being taken off something else. If everybody's focused on the customer experience, we may miss the call center who become part of the customer experience. We may miss the legal staff. There are many stakeholders in design thinking projects. We may not be designing for them, but we do need to incorporate their needs. So even if you have excellent user experience people, there can often be work behind the scenes. Similar to that though, customers don't generally care about the back-end process or the rules. But actually somebody needs to look at the reporting needs, somebody needs to look at the business rules, and somebody needs to look at the processes. So again, in a design thinking process, I've often found a lot of work available for those who want to do it, to look at the back-end processes, the business rules, and the other fun things that BAs traditionally get involved in. Essentially that means some of the team can look forward and some of the team can look outside the actual product to see how it evolves and integrates into the existing ecosystem of the organisation. Which means there are opportunities for the BA. The most obvious one is to call yourself a user experience designer and run around prototyping and experimenting. To be fair, that requires new skills, but I believe it's an extension of the skills the BA has. It's not a radically different thing. So some business analysts who like that sort of thing go in that direction. Others who aren't so much into that can engage the non-customers and analyze the processes and business rules, pairing with an excellent UX person to do a combination looking outside and in together, sometimes using the UX skills and sometimes using the BA techniques and models. Another role is that if there's great designers, the process still needs to be facilitated. In Agile, we have a Scrum Master. In design thinking, maybe a producer, but I actually think having a good facilitator, be they called a BA or anything else, is excellent. And finally, I think where a lot of projects go wrong is not to do with design thinking. It's again to do with bias. People are often trying to build an awesome customer experience, but they're ignoring the questions of sustainability and resilience. They're trying to build quickly, they're trying to build cool, but they're not trying to build stable. They're not trying to build resilient to shock. So another area where a BA can add a lot of value is using BA techniques to look not at the, is this a cool system, but what would happen tomorrow? What happens if the market change? What happens if another system goes down? What happens if the call center have an issue? So building for resilience is, I believe, an emerging area that's going to become increasingly important as the whole world gets faster. As the whole world gets into almost a permanent beta stage, the organisations that can build for resilience, not rigid, but flexible resilience, are going to outperform. So that's an area that I think BAs can move into and start adding a lot of value and carve out a career. So there's Agile, there's design thinking. Both create new opportunities for BAs, but neither involve a BA turning up with a requirements document and just doing things old school. So we've looked at design thinking, we've looked at Agile. Another thing that's becoming bigger and bigger these days is data science. I'm big on the idea of this. I agree that evidence should trump opinion. Asking somebody what they want is very different to demonstrating what we can see happening. So therefore, what data science claims is we should use data rather than conversations. Machines are better at getting data than humans quite often, so we use machines, technologies to gather information, and therefore if machines are analysing data, maybe you could claim we don't really need a BA. Let's have a look at that idea. Well, data science is about gathering and analyzing data, but it's not just for analyzing it, it's analyzing it for actionable results. That's where humans can make a big difference still. Maybe machines are getting better at this, and maybe without data, you're just another person with an opinion, but still we need to interpret the data, and to me, that's old school analysis. Again, it's different. A lot of the analysis is being done through statistics. We gather and analyze the data using statistics. So someone who's good with numbers might be doing that. We also have learning through interpretation and insights, which come from play. Anyone who's met an actuary, a data scientist, or anyone who's analyzing data will notice they actually play with the data. It's not just about getting the data and lining it up in a spreadsheet or using some cool new tool. It's about understanding the implications and playing with them to explore them. So we've got statistics, but learning coming through play rather than just stakeholder meetings and capturing information. Then decisions, which are insights are meant to be actionable, which means we should be able to make decisions. Well, this is an area where I've seen some people really struggle, being able to translate a hypothesis into action. Some people analyze data until they come up with a hypothesis they wanted and act on it, which is not data science. Some people come up with 50,000 hypotheses and talk about how fascinating they are, but can't do anything with that information. The key is to be able to take an insight and turn it into a decision, not just a decision to analyze, but what are we going to do with this new knowledge? So there is analysis happening. If it's analyzing statistics, it makes sense that somebody is a stats person gathering and analyzing that. For some BAs, I think that's an ideal career choice. Learn a bit more stats or apply what you already know and start getting into the data rather than just interviews. I was doing that early in my career, and I know a lot of other BAs who've been involved in that space. The team themselves, though, are analysing the data. If you look at an analytics team, often they're putting information into their system, gathering information out of their system, and the team themselves are analysing it. There's a danger, though, where a team of people who are web developers or a team of people who are data scientists can misinterpret the data because they're using their own assumptions. The BA can be that annoying person who asks stupid questions or starts suggesting the opposite interpretation to everyone else. One of the skills of a good BA is not to gather stakeholder requirements, it's to challenge and upset the stakeholders whilst not being fired, to actually help people test their assumptions and make better decisions. Finally, the stakeholders again in these projects are starting to get involved in the analysis. They're not meant to be just given a bunch of statistics with an answer they're meant to interpret and a decision that's made for them. The stakeholders are meant to ask questions and probe the information and interact with it. So somebody can help facilitate that. Many data scientists are excellent and underrated at facilitating stakeholder engagement with data. But to me, again, a BA can facilitate the analysis so that stakeholders know what the data might mean to them and help them word their questions so they can be turned into a hypothesis and help them determine what decisions to make. To me, that's sort of analysis, it's sort of facilitation, but it's definitely old school BA work. But even in these projects, there can be some gaps. Numbers tell a story, and people tell me numbers don't lie, but they do. The interpretation of numbers can lead to great misunderstanding, not just through bias, but we can look at a number, draw a conclusion, and later we see more numbers that show we were wrong. The next is bias. Numbers tell us what we want to hear. I've seen a number of times where people look at data that amazingly correlates exactly with exactly what they were hoping to find. And then they ignore everything else. Well, a BA can help replace the noise with actual analysis and replace bias with actual evidence we may or may not want to hear. I've also noticed that people who love data often go exploring in all directions, but often our project still has a scope or a purpose. A BA can help facilitate clarifying that value and direction. So we're not just looking at numbers, we're not just looking at experiments, we're not just extracting how many people viewed a video and commenting on it. We're actually saying our purpose on this project is ABC. So that's still core work for a BA. And again, similar to other situations, Discussing data and understanding data are two different things. Talking doesn't mean agreement, and the BA can definitely facilitate better decisions. So how do you get involved and how do you become an awesome BA getting hugely paid? Well, the first idea is to learn statistics and enough coding to support them. If you love that, that's great. If you don't, possibly not the best option. The next one would be to engage the customers to get their information. So somebody is interpreting data, someone else is getting subjective information from customers, which complements, supports, and leads the analysis, not so much replacing it, but integrating with it. Again, data can be used to understand business processes and, to an extent, business rules, but many data science projects are not focused on that. They're focused on customer data, or they're focused on financial data, but someone still can have a look at what does that mean for our process and our business rules. Maybe doing cool things like Monte Carlo analysis, or maybe doing old school things, which are also cool, like a business process model or a workshop with stakeholders. And of course, again, somebody's got to facilitate this process. A single person can interact with data with a single spreadsheet, but a team interacting with stakeholders still needs a process to be facilitated, a process of collaboration, a process of interpretation and sharing and challenging of information. So a real role for a BA would be to bring the scientists together with people so that decisions are based on useful interpretation of data, and data are based on useful hypotheses being tested and experimented with based on real people's needs. So that's all the cool projects gone. BAs can work with data scientists, BAs can get involved in user experience, and BAs can get involved in Agile. We just have to say what's the real need. There's one other type of project I'm interested in though. I teach a course called The Dark Art of Office Politics, and I work with people on political agendas. That may sound evil, because sometimes it is. But actually my work is not so much how to be evil. It's working with businesses and government teams where projects are about a shared vision for a community. An internal stakeholder group could involve the call center, the IT team, and HR and finance, but it's not about a single objective being pursued and then rolled out to everybody. It's about multiple stakeholder groups, whether they're alliances or tribes, who have differing needs and need to collaborate to get a shared organisational value. So what does this political project actually look like? It's not backstabbing people. It's, according to Mahatma Gandhi, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. So we're trying to create a situation where we all feel we're doing the right thing. We can all see value in our work, but that value is a shared understanding. So a political project introduces changes to the way the organisation operates, which means that coalitions and alliances must come together to align on a shared outcome. We may have different needs and different perspectives, but we have to have a shared outcome. And what that means is success is negotiated by the people in those coalitions. It's not preordained. We don't come up with a new product idea and then pursue customers. We actually work with differing stakeholder groups, understanding their different needs and finding common ground. Once we find common ground, we don't want to compromise and throw away everything that's important. We want to collaborate to find the greatest value possible across each of the organisational teams. Sometimes this involves winners and losers, gaining or losing power. Often it involves sitting down and understanding each other's needs so we can find a path to both be happy. Well, how are these different to normal projects? All projects involve some level of agreement across an organisation. But here I actually think there's interaction through the wisdom of the crowd. We don't start with an analysis and a set of requirements and take them to people for sign-off. We use the wisdom of the crowd to start with one version of the truth. Then we move around and we facilitate interaction, getting different changes to that perception, but it's not based on the perfect product, it's based on the perceptions people have. Perceptions drive decisions in these projects, and learning is therefore based on perceptions. Where those perceptions involve groupthink, bad outcomes occur. Where those perceptions are involved in real interaction, real analysis and real evidence, they lead to good outcomes. So the value we want is a win-win outcome. It's not one side wins, but nor is it a perfectly analysed product against a perfect set of product specs. What we need to do is understand the conflicting needs of different team members. Not put those down as we must not have conflict, but actually understand where needs align and where they conflict. Then we can manage the conflict in a productive way. We don't want civil war. We want to facilitate conflict to get shared understanding, shared agreement, and trade-offs we're willing to make. There's always trade-offs in these projects, but success comes from the right ones. Finally, it's not just about getting the best outcome, it's about providing evidence of justice. A lot of people will agree to a project even if they have to give something up, but they can see that it's fair and reasonable. But where there's not an accepted process and they just think they lost, they tend to act later against the interests of the project. They tend to throw away ideas they never agreed with and not adopt things they never thought were worthwhile. Or also they start trying to win by scoring wins against people next time. But this isn't a battle where we want to score wins. This is a shared community where people want to see justice, feel that their needs are met, but also feel that their needs are understood and that they understand the needs of others, so decisions are made on a reasonable, sensible basis, not on an arbitrary someone won because they had the budget. I hope that makes sense. If it does make sense, then it means we still need to do analysis. People may think it's about haggling, but actually there's a champion who's the decision-making person. The sponsor has the budget, but it often involves lobbying. It's not about them having the budget to get whatever they want. It's about people agreeing how to spend the budget we have or the time we have and agreeing what changes need to be done. But the champion is often assessing and analysing many different bits of information as people lobby. The team also do the analysis. And again, where there's a single champion and a single team, they can make assumptions based on their own background, not understanding that different stakeholders' perceptions are equally valid. So the BA can again help upset people by breaking their assumptions down or reflecting them back at them and causing healthy conflict, healthy doubt, questioning of ideas. Analysis is often done by deal makers who pitch ideas or bring people together. I've known several change management projects where the people who really did the analysis were the ones who worked out who to bring into workshops and how to bring deals together, and they met with different people over coffee and brought ideas together. But those deal makers therefore did a lot of the analysis themselves. What we really want is deal makers or people bringing people together to facilitate an understanding, to bring people together and facilitate agreements. To me, that's the core of what a lot of BAs have done on many projects. Finally, alliance members or different groups will be analysing their own needs. Many of my projects these days have 2 or 3 different vendors. Each vendor is participating with my organisation to achieve a good outcome. But behind the scenes, they're still analysing what they need and what their role is and how they go. Some of their needs conflict with other vendors, and some of them are well aligned. But again, what we want is somebody to bring out the conflicting needs. Similarly, we're working with business teams who are very focused on the front line or very focused on compliance. They have their own needs. They're often under-resourced and stretched very far. But what we want to do is understand their needs and help them to analyse their needs and bring the right things to the table. So everybody can be doing analysis, but again, somebody can be facilitating the analysis, somebody can be analysing the information brought to the table, somebody can be highlighting and resolving conflicting needs, and this sort of work to me is the role of a business analyst. Again, I'm not saying these projects need a business analyst. What I'm saying is this work's being done, a business analyst may be the right person to step in and help. So are there any gaps? Well, I use the word political because people think of political as bad. And one of the biggest gaps is a misunderstanding. The interaction between people is meant to bring a shared understanding, but sometimes it brings a win-lose or an argument or more tribal behaviour. So we want interaction to generate understanding, not interaction to generate misunderstanding and conflict. And a BA can help build that shared understanding, to build a shared knowledge of what's important. Also, many of these projects, there's a sponsor with some money, or there's a senior executive with some buy-in, maybe even a minister. But what people often forget is power is fleeting. We're pushing our agenda and we're pulling people together with the authority of someone, but actually nobody's really happy and one quick change in the organisation means that person doesn't have power, and suddenly the whole thing can fall apart. What we want instead is to replace the noise with evidence. So it's not that somebody is the kingpin, we actually have somebody facilitating a shared understanding so that we build something resilient that can withstand restructures and withstand people moving around. Similar to this, it's not so much about power but about scope. A lot of people get caught up in deal making and facilitating, and they totally lose sight of what they were trying to achieve in the first place. So we should still be able to explain to people this change is about an agile way of working. This change is about getting our vendors to work better with our customers and our stakeholders. This change is about something. If we don't know the purpose, misunderstanding through our interaction is very common. And so too is spending money on quick wins for somebody that generates some value locally, but no real value at an organisational level. So again, a BA, just as in other projects, can help clarify the value and the direction. So we're collaborating together and even arguing against each other with a common objective, not half agreeing to an objective, getting halfway through, losing sight of our objective and then arguing about what the objective should be. And of course, you've seen this one before, talking doesn't mean agreement. The BA can facilitate real agreement and real commitment rather than somebody having been engaged or having been consulted. So this is where I think the BA can make the most difference here, helping people abstract away from their personal arguments to try and understand the real value being sought, and having people get down into the detail to understand the real differences between their needs and expectations, and having people collaborate and facilitate together to come up with real commitment. Real commitment across different groups of people leads to real change. A lack of commitment leads to yet another artificial change project that didn't seem to last. So that's what I mean by these kind of projects, and this is where I see a BA facilitating commitment to real outcomes and real value. So are there roles for a BA? Well, yes. You can become a deal maker and wield great power. I've known BAs who didn't even realise they were doing this. They were in between 6 or 7 different organisations, running workshops with them. But actually, they almost had to be consulted for permission to be in the workshop. So if you want to do this, though, I'd say call yourself a deal maker and say you're making deals. Don't call yourself a BA. If you're a BA, though, you can still facilitate learning rather than controlling it. You can still create a process with justice and fairness in it where people will engage you because they want to come to a good shared understanding and they know you have the tools and the attitude to help them get it. Again, I think in these projects, there's a loss of knowledge potentially. So there's a role to capture information, not to make decisions, but to build an understanding of what to do with those decisions. Maybe looking at business processes, maybe looking at constraints and business rules, but looking at how people can exploit and benefit from decisions that have been made and not just get to the point of making it. Of course, there's still the role of community facilitator. These projects, it's critical that someone facilitates the interaction and the collaboration. And it might also be that we need to send somebody out from our team to look at diverse stakeholder groups where a whole team isn't going to be there, but we send a roaming diplomat to go and explore, and then maybe a community facilitator to bring the information together. So these are the opportunities I see for a BA in this type of project. I'm not sure it's a cool type of project that people are claiming is happening, but I've been finding increasingly that organisations are made up of coalitions of vendors or different groups of internal stakeholders, and the BA's role in these projects is to facilitate a shared understanding across artificial borders. So these kind of projects, I think, lead to a particular skill set which will be increasingly important in the future. That's not validated, that's a change king opinion. But these are the kind of projects I looked at in this talk. We've looked at agile, design thinking, data analysis, and now political projects, as I call them. You could call them community-based projects or community movements. So that's really the focus of this talk. I guess my conclusion is that BAs are really valuable, but it's not doing the traditional work. It's working out what the gap is here, what's needed here, and how we can facilitate value, or how we can analyze information or share information. So we can't just apply the same old tools in the same order, but that would be a boring job. We need to identify where we can add value, and we need to work out which areas we truly want to excel at. And then we can work in projects playing to our strengths, but also working on what we find to be fun. Based on that, rather than expecting a BA role we can build our own, I've got two graphs here. The first is looking at what you'd like to do and what you're good at. If you're great at something and it's what you'd like to do, you'll be in demand for it probably. If you really don't want to do something and you're good at it, well, you can mentor others, but you want to get away from it. If you suck at something seriously and and you really don't want to do it and you don't see value in it, well, probably don't focus on that. But once you've worked out things you'd like to do and things that you think you're already good at, that obviously gives you an in. Rather than saying, do you need a BA, you can say, here's some stuff I can help you with which will add value. But if you want to get more serious, then you can look at what will matter, not in your traditional projects, not today, but next, and you can start looking at developing in them. I have a graph there which talks about what's important in the future versus what's important now. According to this graph, in the future we'll have to do experiments. At the moment it's not so important. So that could be an area I focus on. Scope controls never mattered in my fictitious organisation here, so I wouldn't spend time developing that. ISO 90210 was always applied in the past, but it's fading away. I can stick with that if I want to, but it's not going to be there in the future. And facilitation in my organisation I've worked out is critical now and critical later. So if I was going to develop, I guess I'd focus on facilitation and experiments according to this graph. I'm not saying these are the correct answers, but this is a tool I sometimes use when coaching. So what do we do with all this? Well, I've shown a couple of graphs. In the talk I went through them very quickly, and I guess in this talk online I did as well. But the idea is, rather than saying what should a BA be in the future and how can I become whatever that thing is, we say what's important now, well, maybe I should work on that. What's going to potentially be important in the future? Well, that would be an opportunity for me to learn. Say experiments, community management, facilitation might be things I think are important. But now I can have a look at which things are going to be easy to learn and highly valuable. Up here I've got facilitation as being highly valuable and not too difficult to learn. If that were the case, I'd say it's a no-brainer for the person doing this graph. On the other hand, with this person, they might also say there's value in becoming a community manager, but there's no real opportunity on this project. It's something I'd have to chip away at. There's value in learning experiments, but it's going to be hard yards for me. That would be something you would set a long-term goal for and break down looking for opportunities. But if traceability were easy to learn and not much value, you might think I'll do it to learn a bit, but it's something I'll just do when I get the opportunity. I won't look for the opportunity. And learning the new scam agile approach, a made-up term, is really hard for me, but it's going to add no value. I should avoid that and spend my time on something else. So therefore, this graph would help me work out which areas I see value in and which areas I don't. Once I see value in something, then I would deliberately set a goal, not to wait like a victim and be told what a BA does, but say I am going to do something by some date so that I get some benefit from it. It could be read a book, go on a course. It could be get involved in a project, backfill someone else, shadow someone else, whatever it is. It would be good to have a concrete goal that says I'll do this because it will generate an opportunity for me. So that's basically what this talk was about. What's the value of a BA? Depends on the context, but it's not a different job description. It's different types of problems need different types of solutions. So rather than the BA being an all or nothing thing, the BA is a set of tools, techniques, capabilities which can be applied to help people solve their problems. Based on that, the BA of the future is somebody who looks at areas they want to grow in and focuses on them, not somebody who expects a defined exact role for a BA in each different context. Which brings us back to the beginning of the talk, but now rather than redesigning the BA role according to what someone tells you to do, you can be a little bit, I guess, sneaky and say from the perspective of somebody who has a need, the BA can provide this for this reason. But also, what are the things I want to develop and work on, which I can then put forward as things I want to do. So now I can say, well, we need somebody to facilitate, or we need somebody to help manage the community, or we need somebody to capture this information for later. but focus it on the things that proactively we as BAs want to get better at, or we as BAs want to carve out a niche for ourselves. So by giving people some value that they can gain, you can also add some benefits that you can take away yourself. Then I said thank you, asked if there were any questions, which of course with BAs there were a few. There were 270 BAs, there were more people coming up to me after the event. And when they did, of course, I suggested that they buy me a coffee or that they engage a professional training organisation like SoftEd. So if you're interested in taking this a little further, my blog is kingsinsight.com. You can contact me in Australia on the phone number here, or you can contact me by working out how to dial that from your own country or by emailing me. Similarly, if you're interested in learning how a BA can add value in different projects, you can engage SoftEd. SoftEd provide training in Agile, training in different aspects of different work, and important for this context, really good training for BAs in the different areas that are evolving over the future. Thank you very much.